welcome to the next edition of the Weichert Report's video blog. My name is Brandon Weichert, founder and CEO of the Weichert Report, and it's a pleasure to have you here. I'd like to talk a little bit today about what's going on in Syria. It's been recently announced in the last day that apparently, I've known this personally since March of 2016. It was reported on some Israeli websites then that Russia has deployed a handful of Iskander, I can never say it properly, forgive me, any Russian speakers out there, Iskander missiles, which are nuclear-capable missiles, into Syria, operating out of the Latakia Air Base in Syria. Now, they haven't had to use them, obviously, because with this modest amount of Russian military intervention, they've managed to completely tip the scales of the conflict in their favor. This is in part because I believe the Western powers have no real rebel faction on the ground that we can actually do any legitimate amount of work with in terms of if we're trying to overthrow the Assad regime. The Free Syrian Army is a hodgepodge of actors whom we have no idea who they are. There is a high degree of probability that at least some of them are involved in some way with jihadist activities. All in all, as a colleague of mine who works in the intelligence community said back in 2014, America has no business being involved in this conflict. We don't. I've said this elsewhere in other video blogs and in other articles. We should not be trying to intervene in this conflict any longer. This thing is completely out of our control. The Russians, now that the Russians have moved in to back the Iranians and Assad, this is it. That's over. The strategic window of opportunity was open when the protests began in 2011. But President Obama was far too busy dealing with overthrowing our ally, Hosni Mubarak, and he was too busy killing Gaddafi, who for all of his evil was actually one of our nominal allies in the region after 2003. So while he was doing that, a real enemy, Bashar al-Assad, had a potentiality of being overthrown by relatively moderate forces at that time. But as the conflict dragged on, the moderates were, as they often are, just look at the Russian Revolution of 1917, the more moderate elements were quickly subsumed by the more radical Bolshevik elements. In the same case in the Syrian Civil War, whatever moderates there were, whatever true Democrats there were, and it was the same, by the way, in the 2011 Egyptian and the overthrow of Mubarak, there were liberal Democrat constitutionalists that were working very hard to overthrow Mubarak and put in a real democracy. But the Islamist Muslim Brotherhood were far better organized and had a much larger amount of support among the people, so they were ultimately able to finagle their way into power. Well, in the same way, in the Syrian Civil War, the jihadists quickly hijacked the whole damn movement, and the strategic window of opportunity was rapidly lost. You couple that with the fact that 2013 was a second opening when Bashar al-Assad used chemical weapons on his own people, it is believed. And Obama played chicken with Bashar al-Assad and blinked, which then encouraged Russia to move in. Now, I don't know if in the long run removing Bashar al-Assad is the best solution. He's an evil man, and certainly the United States has had considerable antagonism with both Bashar al-Assad and his father, Hafez al-Assad. But the alternative right now is that we end up being in support of these really silly movements of jihadists who in Syria want our help, but then cross the border into Iraq, head up into Libya, are starting to move into Afghanistan, have moved into the Sinai, are spreading all over the place, and outside of Syria, they're trying to kill us. No, I'm sorry. We should take a step back from this one, okay? And now that the Russians have invested so heavily into propping up Assad, he's not going anywhere. And we've lost all legitimacy because now we're going to have to deal with Assad, and Assad's not going to want to deal with us. There's ongoing talks, or the Russians are coordinating these talks in Kazakhstan between the Syrian Assad regime, himself, Iran, the certain opposition members in Syria, oh yeah, and Turkey, our supposed ally. Meanwhile, we're left out in the cold. Well, because we dropped the ball. Now Russia apparently, over the fall, and I'm going to talk about this now because I'm noticing the Wall Street Journal is finally reporting this. In the fall, I spoke with some people who have conducted missions over Syria. And they were all telling me that this is a very tenuous situation, right? Basically, when the Russians intervened, we quickly created a 4-page memorandum, an agreement between our government and the Russian government that basically laid out in 4 pages kind of a safety guide. This agreement was created in 2015 between ourselves and the Russians. And according to the Wall Street Journal, it's the rule of threes. Pilots should keep at least 3 nautical miles of separation horizontally or 3,000 feet vertically. Should they get closer, they'll remain for no more than 3 minutes. Well, of course, the Russians are not respecting that. And as our military has indicated, our military analysts do not actually think it's necessarily Russian hostility. It's just that the Russians have different standards. They operate under different principles and rules when they conduct air operations. I mean, the entire Russian definition of safety is tenuous at best. So here we are now. We have ourselves, for whatever reason, increasing our air commitments over Syria. The Russians are increasing their air commitments over Syria. The Russians and Assad have won this thing. I don't know how else to put it. The window of opportunity to change the situation in Syria is gone. The United States now has to play the longer game. We have to play long ball. Okay? Our military's overstretched. Our troops are overburdened and they're under-resourced. And they're being asked to do more with less. And that's just wrong. That's wrong. And what Donald Trump now is saying, the incoming administration is saying, why don't we take a step back from that? And why don't we actually rehabilitate the military, rebuild it, rearm it, re-equip it, so that we can actually begin to hold the line and to exhibit strength? Why did Vladimir Putin engage in Syria? Because remember, he was not there in the beginning, despite the fact that the Assad regime has, since the 1960s or 70s, been a formerly Soviet and then continued to be a Russian client. Well, the reason was because Mr. Putin assessed that there was weakness on the part of the West, on the part of the United States. There was also economic interests, as I've documented. Putin wants to get that pipeline going from the Middle East through Syria into Europe. This is a ridiculous thing. The United States has no business any longer being involved in Syria. We don't. We now, because of what's going on, there is a huge potential, a very huge potential for a misunderstanding, a mistake to go on in these air operations, with Russian and American planes operating so closely together, not coordinating, or rather the coordination efforts not going to their fullest extent, competing interests when there really shouldn't be. And the entire thing is ready to explode. It's ready to explode. All of this, there's now a huge potential for a misunderstanding, a mistake to go on in these ongoing air operations in which American and Russian fighter jets are so close to each other. We already saw this happen. We've already seen this happen with the Turks. The Turks and the Russian fighter jet in November of 2015 strayed a little bit into the Turkish airspace, and the Turks blew it out of the sky. I mean, something similar could very well happen between American and Russian pilots. We on the ground understand, at least our military guys on the ground, our analysts, think that the Russians really aren't trying to antagonize our pilots by not responding to their queries, by not squawking, their transponder codes to let other aircraft operating in the area know that, hey, we're an armed fighter from Russia. It's just the Russians don't behave like that. They don't follow those international norms. They really never have. And so for us to think that they're going to do that suddenly is ridiculous. And so we could be in a situation where suddenly something happens to, say, a Russian plane that happens to be near an American fighter. The plane goes down, the pilot dies, Russian. As the Wall Street Journal article notes, most of these accidents that occur, most of these incidents that occur, 9 times out of 10, it's because of mechanical failure in the plane. But when you have two different countries' planes that are not necessarily on friendly footing right now, operating in such close proximity to each other, there's a chance, a very real chance, for a significant diplomatic incident. It could even precipitate a war. We saw what happened when the United States accidentally dropped bombs recently on pro-Assad forces. It was a misfire. We didn't mean to. We had the wrong information. The Russians tried to make hay of it. We saw what happened in Kosovo in 1999 when an American bomber mistakenly blew up the Chinese embassy. The Chinese have never forgiven us for this. They don't believe that it was a mistake. They believe in the infallibility of the American military. And so I'm telling you, even if something does go wrong and it is a mechanical failure, say with a Russian jet, there's a likelihood that the Putin regime is going to try to make political hay out of it. Think about that. Are we willing to go to war with Russia over Syria? This is a question that I have been asking people all over the place in D.C., and I can't get an answer. This brings me to the point that I initially made my video blog. I heard about 3 hours ago it was a surrealistic experience in which I, a conservative, found myself playing the dove when it comes to Russia. For 8 years, I have been warning people about the threat of Russia. I have been asking my friends who work for the DNC, who work in the White House, where is the Obama foreign policy on Russia? Why aren't we doing more to seriously curb their aggression? Had we done something 8 years ago, or had we never just engaged in that ridiculous reset, had we done something substantive 8 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, this situation would not be the way it is today. But we didn't. Just like what happened in Syria with us not intervening early. If we really wanted to make a difference, you have to intervene early and you have to be decisive. The same is true with dealing with Russia. I'm not necessarily talking about military intervention, but diplomatic, whatever. We didn't do anything. And what we have done, these sanctions, Rex Tillerson is right. They're stupid. These are weak sanctions. We're micturating in the wind is what we're doing. And it's ridiculous, frankly. And so I was asking some people today, What is the administration going to do? What do they want to do? Well, it sounds to me like if they had their way, they would be escalating with Russia, which defies all logic. Right now, Russia has all the cards. I don't understand. In Ukraine, in Syria, Russia has all the cards now. Russia's military is at its peak efficiency right now. I don't think they're going to be able to maintain it for very long, but the fact is that they are. They have all of the pieces they need in position to be a devastating attack force against American and allied forces in both Ukraine and Syria. Why the hell, at a time when we need to be dealing with ISIS, Al-Qaeda, when we need to figure out what's going on in Afghanistan, when we need to be making the pivot to Asia, when we need to be containing the Mexican drug war that has been killing more people than the Iraq and Afghanistan wars combined, and that is destabilizing Central America, and that is having deleterious effects on the American southwest border, when we need to be rebuilding our domestic situation here in the States. 8 years of an anemic economic recovery. Non-recovery. Why are we picking a fight with Russia? And then I realized today what it was all about. I realized today what it was after talking to these people that I know at the DNC. I'm not going to say who they are, and they know who they are. This is nothing more than petty revenge for the purported Russian hacking of the election. For the record, as I've written at AmericanGreatness.com, the Russians did not hack the election. Not a single ballot box was hacked. In fact, I've worked on campaigns. I know how the elections go. I know how electronic balloting works. They're never connected to the internet. You can't hack something that's not hooked up to the internet, to the World Wide Web. Russian spies, FSB guys, weren't going in there with little thumb drives and, installing Trojan, malware and Trojan horse software. That's not what was going on. What happened was Hillary Clinton, first of all, had an undefended server, private server, that was extremely hackable. What happened was her chief of staff, John Podesta, who should know. By the way, I used to work campaigns, and I can tell you with 100% certainty that I have been, when I worked on campaigns I was approached by a French. I know somebody I was approached by a French person and a Chinese. They both were working for their respective governments at two different points in 2012. I was at an event in Chicago. I happened to be wearing my Romney pin. Now, I was a nobody on the campaign. I was lowly, but they didn't know that. And I quickly realized when the Chinese representative from the Chicago consulate asked me to do business, I quickly backed away. I thought he just wanted to have a conversation. And I realized, oh my God, he's trying to find. And then the French person that I was talking to was also representing the consulate in Chicago. And they wanted to have a conversation with me about where I thought the election was going and would I be willing to meet up and have. Of course, these political operatives for both the Republican and Democratic Party should realize they're going to be targeted by foreign entities. And John Podesta, being the chief of staff for the Hillary Clinton campaign, should have known better with all of his years of experience, both in government and on campaigns, that you don't have your entire email password be the word password. Give me a break. So if we want to call it if we want to call it a hack, fine, in the sense that someone in Russia sat down on their computer and logged on and figured out, hey, if I type in password, I can log on to Podesta's email and get all the goods. Nothing was ever forged, by the way, from Podesta's email. What's going on is the administration of the Democratic Party is hugely embarrassed, right? They are looking to get back both at Donald Trump for winning, at the Republican Party for shellacking them, to use the president's word, as well as getting back at the Russians. And they're doing that by escalating with Russia. This after 8 years of President Obama cutting the military. As Bob Woodward details in The Price of Politics, sequestration was this insane ploy that was perpetrated by the White House, not by the Republicans in Congress. The Republicans in Congress fell for it stupidly, but it was the White House that did it because Obama wanted to slash the military. It gave him a perfect excuse to do it. We've had 8 years of divestment in our military, 8 years of retrenchment in foreign policy. And now suddenly, when we are at our weakest point, this current outgoing administration with less than 2 weeks left, I'm sorry, a little bit more than 2 weeks left, I think 18 days, is now suddenly interested in poking the bear when the bear is riled up. Where's the strategy? I recently reread the Atlantic article, the Goldberg piece that was done on. It was an interview with Obama in which Obama was prideful of the fact. He was proud of the fact that he had kept America out of unnecessary wars. Let me tell you something, Mr. President. You came into office campaigning against Bush's war of choice, the unnecessary wars of the Bush campaign, of the Bush administration, and you're leaving office choosing to go into an unnecessary war with the Russians. Nuclear-armed Russia. And by the way, as I've asserted elsewhere, I have no doubt that if the Russians have deployed Iskander missiles, nuclear-capable missiles, in Little Latakia base, Syria, undoubtedly they have deployed them also in Crimea and on the border of eastern Ukraine. So my question is, Mr. President, are you seriously going to leave office trying to start a war because you were embarrassed? Enough is enough. Now, I'm not anti-war, I'm not pro-war. Right? I'm a strategist. And if we're going to go to war, we need to do it at a time of our choosing. We need to do it when it's best for us, so that our guys don't get needlessly killed. And I understand that not all wars are fought that way, that sometimes they're thrust upon us. But that's why you always, always, always need to secure the peace by always preparing for war. After 8 years, we are unprepared for war and we are losing the peace. So let's take a step back. On January 20th, a new administration is coming into power. Mr. Trump, for better or worse, wants to try to balance relations with Russia. I don't know how effective it will be, but I do know this. I think it's rule of acquisition number 98. Every once in a while, declare peace. It confuses the hell out of your enemies. And so we might not be able to keep peace with Russia. In fact, I doubt we will. But damn it, we might be able to get 2, 3, or maybe even 4 good years of stability with Russia that will give us time to rebuild our forces and create a truly effective, credible deterrent. That, my friends, will keep the Russian bear back. That will keep them back. Until then, I don't know what we're going to do other than to mitigate losses. We should pull out of Syria, refocus our efforts in Iraq to killing ISIS, try to figure out what's going on in Afghanistan. I mean, the forgotten war again. Mr. President Obama, why don't you finish one of these wars before you go starting another one? And we need to pivot to Asia. And I would like to have some understanding of what's going on in Latin America. Thank God the Colombians signed that peace agreement with FARC, but then we have neighboring Venezuela completely collapsing, which will destabilize Colombia, Colombia is one of our greatest partners. Mexico's a shambles right now. The disaster in southern Mexico with the Sinaloa cartel has destabilized Central America, which is causing all of the migrant flows, the parentless children on La Bestia, the train. I mean, all of these, and the economy, all of these problems that have remained unresolved, that have been in part created by the Obama administration, and that have been exacerbated by the Obama administration. And now we're going to suddenly go gallivanting off the war to defend Hillary Clinton and the Democrats' honor, when in fact, they were caught being bad. It happened that it was the Russians who revealed it. Oh well, you don't go to war over that. You don't. It's not worth it. This should be very interesting. I'm still very optimistic. I still think we're generally moving toward a more stable international environment over the next couple of years. But the next 18 days, it's pretty damn historic in the sense that you are having, for the first time, I think, an outgoing president, I think since Buchanan, in which so much of our foreign policy is collapsing. And it's certainly one of the rare times I can remember outside of an actual declaration of war in which we seem to be teetering on an expansive, military operation against potentially a rival nation state with nukes. 18 days left, I think, a little bit more than 2 weeks. Can you imagine if George W. Bush, in his last 18 days, decided to bomb the hell out of Iran? Or if he had decided to respond militarily to Russia's invasion of Georgia? Maybe deploy some, Marine units to block the Rocky Tunnel going into Georgia. It would have been a national scandal of epic proportions to the Democrats. So just remember that. This is unprecedented, and it's wrong. It's unethical. January 20th can't get here soon enough. So there you have it. I got partisan this time. I'm sorry if I lose some people, but that's just the way it goes. I am of the mind, after 8 years of Obama, change can't come soon enough. Not that any of the post-Cold War presidents, I really think that since Reagan, there really hasn't been a really great American president, but that's another podcast for another time, or video blog. For the Weichert Report, my name is Brandon Weichert. Have a great day, guys. Thank you for listening. Thank you for giving me your time. I really, really, truly appreciate that. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good day.